Well, thank you, Paige, and hello, all you hardworking managers and board members. Thank you for taking time out of your day today to join us. We created this webinar based on all those requests that we received to help you understand what this document is that you're getting into your hands. You decided to update it, and now you've got it, but the question is, what do you do with it? How do you get maximum value from it? And what is it telling you? All reserve studies contain 3 basic results, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. But there's much more that a reserve study can tell you if you know what you're looking at. And it reminds me of a friend who was a minor league baseball player. And one year he was invited to the Dodgers spring training squad for their major league team. And he told the story about famous Dodger base runner Maury Wills spending an hour and a half walking his group of minor leaguers around the base paths, discussing the intricacies of going from home to first, then first to second, and second to third, and finally from third to home. An hour and a half discussing the nuances of a circuit that most people just run in a few seconds. Now, I'm not going to spend an hour and a half today, but in the next 30 minutes, I'll help you start to pick up what different things mean, gaining a next level understanding of this new document that you have in your hands. This is the outline that we're going to follow for today's program, taking you through the issues that get you familiar with that document that you paid good money to receive. So let's start at the beginning. And the first question is, major questions: who, what, and when? What am I looking at here? What do I think about it? How do I start to absorb it? And it may be 50 pages, it may be 150 pages. So the question is, where do you even start? So let's start with the cover page. And the first question is who? And look at the highlight here. It shows the credentials of the person who prepared it. What you want to look for is someone who has an RS or PRA behind their name. There'll be usually a RS or PRA and their credential number. That's the credential of a reserve study professional. You don't necessarily get what you're looking for with an engineer or an architect or a contractor or an MBA even. You're looking for someone who is familiar with the nuances of reserve study components, terminology, calculations, the multi-year funding plan, all those kinds of things, and you get that from someone with an RS or PRA. Next, what are you getting? Well, there's 3 types of reserve studies, 3 levels of service. This one here is an update, no site visit. And for those of you, many of you who've been to our previous webinars probably know what this is, but since again about half of you haven't been to previous webinars, there's 3 levels of service. There's a full reserve study and 2 different update products: update with site visit and update no site visit. Now, the full reserve study is typically only done once we know that there's 85,000 square feet of asphalt and 127,000 square feet of roofing. It is what it is. You don't need to hire us to reestablish those numbers. And the with site visit is typically done every 3rd year. That's now national best practice. That's new information since Champlain Towers South fell in 2021. And the no site visit is a great, very inexpensive, but valuable update that many associations do in those in-between years 2 and 3, in between that every 3rd year product. So know what you're getting, and even think about what you're asking for in the proposal process. When was our last with site visit update? When was the last time someone was on site? So are you just looking for a no site visit update at this point in time, or a with site visit update? And this is where you see it right on the cover. Okay, when? There's a number of dates that you'll see in a reserve study. The key date is when it begins, when its effective date is. And for a number of years now, we've been emphasizing the perishable aspect of a reserve study by putting an expiration date in, December 31st or 365 days after that beginning date, to help clients understand that this is not a 10-year document. We are documenting, it's a study of what's going on at the association right now. And every reserve study is good for 1 year. After that year that is prepared, all the observations are old. The reserve balance is old. The recommendation is old, and very much less significant and appropriate for guiding the association forward. So look for a beginning date. Also look for when it was prepared. That'll give you an idea if this was the I want to say the original reserve study delivered for them, or if it was an update, things like that. So look for that kind of information as you're guiding the association forward. Give me a moment here to reclaim my screen credentials. There we go. And I mentioned earlier, there's 3 results that every reserve study will have. When I was preparing for this webinar, I was thinking, okay, should I get one of our reports and a couple from a couple of our different competitors and show you the similarities and differences? And I just started doing that, and I realized it would just be tremendously confusing. So I'll just talk about the information that you need to look for. You're not looking for gems or key information in all 50 or 150 pages. You're looking for 3 primary results: the component list, the reserve fund strength, and the funding plan. This tells you where you are physically, where you are financially, and where to go from here. Specifically, that component list will look something like this. It's a table description of projects. It's not description of assets, because like here with asphalt, you can see asphalt seal project is every 5 years, but the resurface project is every 20 years. So we're not talking just asphalt. You're talking which project. And it may be replace, it may be resurface, it may be repair, it may be modernize, but we're talking about projects. The useful life in years, the remaining useful life in years, where 0 means it needs to be done now, and the current costs. Reserve study brings all costs current to the effective start date. And as you can imagine, in all the reserve studies we've been doing in the last year, we spend a lot of time updating these current costs to make sure that we are on top of what the current costs are with all the inflation that we've had recently. So for those of you who had reserve studies completed last year, boy, there was a lot of work to do to refresh these costs. And if you were comparing to the reserve study prior, probably a significant difference between costs prepared for your 2023 reserve study and the costs that appeared in your prior reserve study. Now, from this information, we are able to create a map of the reserve expenses. And I like putting it in a graphical sense because it gives you kind of a fingerprint of what's going on at your association. It helps you know what projects are ahead of us. There's no reason to be surprised. Reserve study helps you get the information you need to see the future clearly. You can see that there's going to be, in the second, third year, a couple of big expenses. You get a couple of years break, another large expense year, then a few years of light expenses. But something big is downstream. This could be roofing. This could be an elevator modernization. We know those things are going to happen. Know them now. There is no reason to be surprised by these things, even though they're a long ways downstream. Okay, so understand what your reserve, kind of the rhythm of your reserve expenses. And then the question is, do we have enough? It may seem like piles of money. The association is a big multi-million-dollar not-for-profit real estate corporation. And in many cases, if not most cases, it should have significant financial assets. But the question is, do you have enough at your association? And the answer is, you typically measure adequacy by percent funded. Percent funded is the ratio of your physical deterioration to your reserve cash. And so it's a nice way for large associations, small associations, new associations, old associations, all to be able to compare how are we doing? How well does our reserve cash fit our reserve needs? And so think about it in terms of reserve cash, percent funded, not the actual cash, because you could have a tiny brand new association and $500,000 could be an incredible lot of money. But for a 150 unit association that's 20 years old facing a roofing project, $500,000 could be woefully inadequate. So think about percent funded. And the reason is because this is what we learned. If we plot percent funded, and I go from 0 to 120% here, it is very possible for associations to have surplus cash. If your association has what we call a weak percent funded, meaning it's in the 0 to 30% range, look how how much exposure you have to special assessments. Basically, running out of cash and needing an extra source of income. When your reserves are weak, you need to have extra cash to be able to do your projects. And then the opposite is true. When your reserves are strong, above 70% funded, basically all you have are natural surprises. And those are the things that you have special assessments for. That's why they were created in your governing documents. You should not be having emergency special assessments for a roof that deteriorated in plain sight, right on schedule, over 20 years. So percent funded does tell you a lot of information about where you are, what's going on with your association at this point in time. And so bottom line is, if your association is in the 0 to 30% range, you're basically pretty much in trouble. Prior boards haven't set enough money aside, you're behind, and you're at significant risk of not being able to pay the bills for necessary projects coming up at the association. Okay, so now knowing where you are starting, you have to figure out, okay, how are we going to get to the future? What do we do? And we've done entire webinars on this subject, and we'll have another webinar, I believe in April, on breaking down the reserve funding process, where we'll talk about the nuances of all this. But in general, as far as for just understanding the big picture of what a reserve study is telling you, typically reserve funding is in the range of 25% of your total budget, a quarter of your total budget. Often it ranges, we see clients commonly from 15 to 40%, but it's going to be a big chunk of your budget. So if you are getting a reserve study for the very first time, you look at the recommended funding and you say, my goodness, that's a big number. And then you compare it to your overall budget. There's a pretty fair chance it's going to be in the range of 15 to 40% of everything. It's going to be a big number. So brace yourself for that. That is entirely normal. All right, well, let me talk about walking through the reserve study itself. You get it, you're looking at it, and I told you about the cover, I told you about the key things to look for, but typically our reserve studies and those of our competitors are organized the same way, where the key information is at the beginning. We have an executive summary. Most of our competitors have an executive summary. And then at the back of the report is typically the inventory details. So the back of the report is extra information, detailed information on what we saw when we were looking at your ironwork, what we saw when we were looking at your garage doors. And here I can even see that at this association, the maintenance, repair, and replacement is the responsibility of the individual owners. So no funding is required. So this is where you get that kind of detail. So when you're thinking, where the heck are our garage doors in our reserve component list? You can see back here and say, oh, at our association, it's private property. But on the executive summary, and let's look at it here, it's a no site visit, number of units, the date from and to, the findings and the recommendations are as of January 1, the starting reserve balance, the fully funded or that target reserve balance, and that results in the association being about 52% funded. You see that here in the chart, which, as we showed in that chart just a moment ago, it's about a medium risk of special assessment, a medium risk of running out of cash. And our recommendation is for $4,600 of reserve funding per month. And that's a little bit of an increase from their $4,320 in the last year. So kind of a big picture. And then there will be the component list that follows. So that's, bottom line is, look for the key 3 elements right at the beginning of a reserve study. Should be likely in the first 10 pages. The bulk of the reserve study is a lot of details that don't by themselves make or break, and you don't have to memorize all this stuff. Okay, in the body of the report, you will see a narrative that talks about your funding goal, what we're trying to accomplish. Those of you who've been to prior webinars know the terms that I'm about to say: full funding, threshold funding, and baseline funding. Those are different goals. We tend to be a full funding goal company here at Association Reserves. We like to have our clients set up for success. The other kind of things you're going to find out are the methodology. How did we come about getting this information together? What computational method did we use? And you may see words like a straight line or cash flow, things like that in here. And then this is a sneak preview. At this point in time, National Reserve Study standards require 20 years of income and expenses. And since this is for 2023, in the next couple of months, the newly updated National Reserve Study standards will come out, and they are requiring a minimum of 30 years of income and expenses. So again, we're looking far into the future, far enough that will help you anticipate those big projects, far enough that it will help you not be surprised, and far enough that that cash flow plan will set you up for success. And just a reminder that you're never really done because everything is always changing. Think about what we just talked about. The starting balance is going to change actually month to month. Inflation and interest changes each year. Inflation is fortunately starting to come down a little bit. Interest is fortunately starting to come up a little bit. And associations are getting more safe investment vehicles. Current costs are changing. We have to update those in your reserve study, and the current conditions, how they're wearing and tearing, how technology might make your building's entry intercom system obsolete, things like that. What are the current conditions at your association? But those are the fundamentals of understanding a reserve study, basically beginning to end. Now it's time to talk about communicating results. You have that reserve study. You have looked it over. You've perhaps identified or circled or jotted down the 3 key results, tabbed where the component list is, tabbed your starting percent funded, tabbed where the recommendation is for funding. But now it's your job to communicate those results to everyone else. So let me give you a little bit of help going through that process. There is a strategy that we can set you up for so you will have success. So you're here at the board meeting, you're here at the committee meeting, and remember that one of the first questions is, by golly, that recommendation, that funding recommendation is a lot of money. That's why we didn't want to get a reserve study, because now it's going to make all our assessments go up. Well, I want to clarify that reserve project costs are what they are. The reserve study doesn't make anything more expensive at your association. And so it's not an issue of we can or can't afford that. Reserve projects are what they are. All we're doing is helping you see the future, because things are deteriorating every day at your association. Now, classically, there's 3 ways to respond. You can respond with doing nothing, and that means that you'll just go from special assessment to special assessment to special assessment, always being surprised. It's a real bumpy road for your homeowners. It's real unfair, because they may own there in a few years where there's just tremendous expenses, or they may be there in a few years where there's not very many expenses. Or you can catch loans to help the association. That's pretty darn expensive. Or you can do with budgeted assessments, just paying what the association is deteriorating along the way. And you're wondering what that third point is? The third point is loss in home value. This is the most expensive way to pay for the deterioration at the association, because it draws down property values. And it's going to make the budgeted assessments of $50 or $100 a month, or the $1,000 special assessment, look cheap, because what we're talking about here is more than 10%. If you baseline an association's home values when the association is 0 to 30% funded, that weak zone that I spoke about a few moments ago, the homes in associations right next door to it that are otherwise identical have a strong reserve fund, over 70%. Home values there typically sell for 12.6% more on average. So think about it, 10% difference in home value. If you've got a $500,000 condo, we're talking about $50,000 here. And that's going to make a few more dollars more a month pretty darn seem trivial. So keep that in mind. Okay, choose your words carefully. Make sure you're talking about the funding needs of the association, not contributions. Contributions have that basic connotation of a voluntary thing. It's something benevolent that you're doing for someone or something else. Reserve funding is also not for the future. It offsets ongoing deterioration. It's not a contribution for a rainy day. Again, that sounds like a nice thing to do, but not our problem. It's not for padding. It's not for emergencies. Again, in reserves, we're talking about the deterioration of the roof, the asphalt, the boiler, the chiller, the elevator, the carpet. These are planned obsolescence, planned deterioration type projects. We're not touching the idea of emergencies here. Reserve funding offsets ongoing deterioration, so everyone's paying their fair share and the association doesn't run itself into the ground. And besides, when you do the math, reserve funding is not a lot of money. If you take that big reserve funding recommendation, divide it by the number of homeowners, divide it by 12 months per year, you're going to find out that reserve funding on a daily basis is about a cup of coffee per day. It's not a lot of money. So people are going to kick and scream. And when they kick and scream and have their Starbucks or whatever they have in their hand, you and I know that if they can afford that premium coffee drink, they can afford reserve funding. Okay? It's not a big expense. It's just part of owning a home and maintaining that home's maximum value and keeping it in a condition where its value is appreciating. Okay? Now let's turn towards talking about interpreting the results. We've given you some clues to what to look for in it, clues to communicating the results. Now, let me help you get a good gut feel for how those things come together and what they really are saying. So, think of it like this. You're on a journey to the future. I alluded to this earlier. Where are we physically? Where are we financially? And how do we get to the future? How do we get there? And so that is summarized in the 3 results of every reserve study. The component list tells where you are physically. The reserve fund strength says where we are financially, what's our starting point. And the funding plan is how do we get there? And think of it again as a journey. We are starting at year 0. We're moving forward into the future, left to right. And we got to cross these mountains of expenses. How are we going to get there? Well, we need a funding plan that provides for us, but then it all depends what your starting point is. Is your reserve fund starting out being strong or weak? That's going to make a difference. I'm going to go backwards a slide here. If you are let's just talk about this association. If this association is starting out at $20,000, they're going to have a hard time crossing this $50,000 or so of expenses in the next year. Yet, if this association is on its way to having enough money for all these projects, it just looks to me like $60,000 to $80,000 might be a better starting point. Collecting funds, being prepared for these bigger expenses. And so the starting point makes a big difference. So is your reserve fund strong or weak? And again, you can look at this chart. Where are we starting? Are we starting in a hole where we're probably going to have to special assess to have enough cash to get these projects done? An emergency special assessment, a surprise special assessment? Or are we some of the associations, and this is about 1/3 of the associations out here, 30% of associations are well funded and they are well situated to take care of themselves. The only reasons they have special assessments is a true emergency. So there's a lot of value in being well prepared. So again, as you're thinking about interpreting those results, okay, what's this mean? Perhaps we need to make some budget changes. You're looking at this and saying, we're in a weak spot, we're in a fair spot, we're in a strong spot. These upcoming expenses, maybe we need to heed the recommendation and see what's going on, make some changes. Okay, so depending on where your starting point is, you're going to spend some money. It's going to draw the reserve balance down, but yet you're collecting the reserve fund transfers and reestablishing your funding. So you want to have a funding plan providing for the needs of the association. And not just that, but perhaps a little bit of margin, because what if this expense here happens a year or 2 early? You want to be ready in case something slips, if there's a bad storm, or if you have a little bit extra inflation in making this project a little tougher than it was originally expected. It's good to have some kind of margin. Otherwise, you're going to get into a situation, and this is a chart from our UPlanet online calculator. Everyone has access to this, all of our clients at least. When you test out different funding plans, you can see if and when you crash and burn. Okay, when you lower your reserve funding rates, you can get to a point where you just plain run out of money. The projects are what they are. The roof is not going to wait for you to accumulate funds. It's going to leak when it wants to leak. And again, another reminder, delaying projects delaying the reserve funding, giving the association what it needs, doesn't result in any cost savings. The projects still need to be done. And if you can remember, when you get to a situation like this, that's when your property values get to be affected, where all of a sudden you're shooting yourself in the foot because all of a sudden the place starts to not look nice and you're not getting maximum value. So be careful. Understand your role as a leader is to provide for the needs of the association, make sure it's sustainable, and help it get to the future. All right, let's turn towards talking about using the reserve study through the year. Primarily, a reserve study is used at budget time in the last 2 or 3 months prior to the start of your fiscal year, as you're developing the budget, as you're looking at the reserve study, as you're communicating the results to the homeowners, as you're interpreting the results. But it is a document that you can effectively use throughout the year. And it starts out with, what's your to-do list? Well, this sample association that we've been looking at, there's not a long to-do list for this first year. And these boards of directors may be wiping their brow and saying, we lucked out. Because look at this. This is a reserve component list year by year by year by year. You can see that in this initial year, this board has a lot of projects to start taking care of. And so in the first month of their fiscal year, they need to be starting their strategy, figuring out who's going to contact decking people, who's going to contact the siding people, who's going to contact the roofing people. And that's going to take some time. And so this is your assignment for what you're doing in the course of the year. Or it may be a different property. Here we go with a different one. This property has a balcony inspection project to do. They can assign that to someone and you can check it off. And what do we have? The little pool building roof. Simple project, not too big of a deal. But this is your to-do list for the year. And I just want to remind you that if you don't get to these projects, it doesn't save you any money. The projects don't go away. They still need to be done, but they'll get done next year. So you haven't really saved any money. You haven't crossed anything off. The expenses still stay there. And remember that most delayed projects end up costing the association extra money. And that's because something as simple as painting the building, I guess that's not simple, but I should say it's straightforward, as painting the building. If you don't do that, then all of a sudden you have dry rot issues and you have the extra cost of all the carpentry repairs. You just have to be very careful because in many cases, delayed projects cost extra money. So by deferring a year, you've just shot yourself in the foot. Deferred projects often get 20 to 50% more expensive. You add inflation to it, and that's just a bad decision. Okay, you may have a project that is, wow, I thought it was a reserve project. It seems like it should be a reserve project, but I don't see it here on the component list. How do we pay for this, operating or reserves? And you can look at the National Reserve Study Standard 4-part test. Is it a common area of responsibility? Does it have a limited useful life? Does it have a predictable remaining useful life? And is it above a minimum cost? And we'll talk about this when we do our breaking down the reserve components webinar that's coming up. But then again, I suggest that this perhaps isn't your problem. Maybe it's a whole lot easier if you just plain contact your reserve study provider and say, okay, how should we handle this expense coming up? We need to repair a corner of the roof. We need to replace the pool pump. Something big, something small. How do we do this project? And just get some wise counsel from your reserve study provider. Because we're trying to make sure that you don't spend your reserves, those precious reserves, carelessly. You're going to need them for your reserve project. We don't want you letting your reserve money leak out to other things, especially not leaking out to the operating budget. The operating budget needs to be standing on its own because you're going to need to fight for those reserve projects. All those reserve projects need dollars too. If someone is saying that, but our insurance has gone up, and yes, your insurance has gone way up over the last 12 or 24 months, but your roof is getting more expensive also, and your roof is not going away. And your roof deteriorated a whole bunch last year. So don't shoot yourself in the foot and use all your roof money or whatever reserve money paying for insurance. All your reserve projects need dollars also. So fight to maintain your reserve funding through the year. And maybe that means you need to raise your assessments mid-year. If that's the facts of the matter, that's what you need to face. Now let me start to bring this to a close now in our breaking down the reserve study process webinar, bringing it together in a summary. So what do I want to communicate big picture? Big picture is that everything is constantly changing. You need to appreciate the reserve study is for a particular point in time because the conditions, the costs, interest and inflation, the reserve balance is in a continual state of change. So that's why some reserve studies are going to show even an expiration date at the end of that year. Appreciate that this gives you good counsel, wise counsel for a period of time. And so expect that. Updating your reserve study will rebalance those three main factors: the costs, your starting point, and the funding needs. And that may mean that your reserve funding needs go up a little faster than we expected, or if you're getting a strong return on your reserve investments, maybe that can offset some of your reserve funding, and maybe you can even keep your reserve funding rate the same for another year. Basically, the point is you get these all rebalanced. And what does success look like? It means lack of special assessments. It means being able to get your projects done on time. Your percent funded is above 70%, so you do have that cash to be able to do projects on time. And your reserves are spent appropriately. You're not, I don't want to say wasting, because operational overages, I'm not going to call that wasting, but you need to spend your reserves on reserve projects, and your operating fund needs to stand on itself because those reserve projects still need money. What we want to achieve here is a sustainable association with pride of ownership, where there are funds to maintain the curb appeal and maximize property values. That's what we're trying to do with a reserve study. And there are those gems in it. Three major results. Maybe you can recall it if you're taking notes, or maybe you just remember it. The component list, what you have there physically, the starting reserve fund strength measured in percent funded, what you're starting from financially, and number third, what it takes to get successfully to the future. That's going to be the three things primarily look for in your reserve study. And we have this online reserve study calculator. It's a great little thing. It's free to Association Reserves clients. It's very user-friendly. All calculations are consistent with National Reserve Study standards. It will allow you to play around with your numbers and not affect your reserve study. It's a little sandbox on the side where you can say, well, what happens if? And it's a great little tool. Again, it'll help you take that reserve study document and make it come alive for you and your association. And remember that we are here at Association Reserves to help you. Done a whole lot of reserve studies in all 50 states and some international countries. We have a great depth of resources in our website. It's a real library of information. And we also have some tremendous information on YouTube. We have a channel, and it has full reserve studies with guest experts, full reserve studies of additional content that we've done today. It has little short videos of specific portions of webinars. It's a great thing. So consider subscribing, seeing all these gems when they come out. Again, we're trying to empower you with success at your association. And that brings us to the end of our prepared content today. So let me turn the microphone over to Paige, who will work as our MC during the Q&A portion of our program. Paige.